Madeline adjusted her pearl necklace for the third time, studying herself in the ornate bathroom mirror of the Plaza Hotel in New York City. The navy blue gown she had chosen seemed appropriate for the Manhattan Cultural Foundation's charity gala, but something in her reflection bothered her. Perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion in her eyes, a direct result of spending countless sleepless nights meticulously restoring a 16th-century painting in her small studio. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, knowing the night ahead would be a trial of her patience and dignity. "Madeline, you are taking an absolute eternity in there," Richard's voice echoed from the opulent hotel bedroom, dripping with his usual impatience. "The gala has already started, and I need to greet the board of directors before all the good networking opportunities vanish." She opened the door to find Richard adjusting his silk tie in front of the full-length mirror, looking utterly impeccable in his tailored tuxedo. At 42 years old, he maintained the haughty posture of a man who had built a massive real estate empire entirely from scratch. Right beside him, Victoria was finishing up a meticulous application of ruby red lipstick, every single movement calculated for absolute aesthetic perfection. The 28-year-old social media influencer looked as though she had just stepped out of a high-fashion magazine, her shimmering gold dress clinging to every curve like a second skin. "Finally," Richard muttered under his breath, barely sparing a glance in Madeline's direction as he checked his luxury watch. "Let us go. We are already fashionably late, and I have important hands to shake." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was buzzing with the most select members of Manhattan's high society, an intimidating sea of wealth and influence. Powerful corporate executives, ambitious politicians, celebrated artists, and wealthy socialites circulated gracefully between trays of sophisticated canapés and crystal flutes of expensive champagne. Madeline walked a few paces behind Richard and Victoria, silently observing how they naturally became the center of attention wherever they stepped. Richard greeted acquaintances with firm handshakes and hearty pats on the back, while Victoria posed for the event photographers with her characteristic stance, her right leg always positioned slightly forward. "Richard, it is so incredibly good to see you here." Charles Miller approached them, known across the city as one of the largest real estate developers in the metropolitan area. "And this gorgeous woman must be the famous Victoria. It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you in person." Victoria extended her hand with a carefully studied elegance, offering a melodious and perfectly practiced greeting. Madeline remained quietly in the corner, waiting patiently to be introduced, but Richard seemed to have completely erased her presence from his mind, a painful habit he had developed over the past few months. "And you must be—" Charles finally noticed Madeline standing awkwardly in the shadows, clearly unsure of how to address her or what her relation was to the golden couple. "Madeline." She introduced herself with a timid, polite smile, her voice wavering slightly. "I am Richard's wife." An incredibly awkward and heavy silence descended upon the small group, suffocating the previously cheerful atmosphere. Richard cleared his throat loudly, visibly annoyed by the sudden shift in tone. "Madeline tinkers with some old paintings," he said in a dismissive, utterly disinterested tone. "It is just a quaint little hobby to keep her busy, right?" The carelessly cruel words struck Madeline like a physical blow to the face, completely invalidating her entire life's passion. 15 years of intense dedication to the rigorous conservation and restoration of historical artworks, a career requiring profound technical and scientific expertise, had just been reduced to a meaningless pastime. She swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile to remain on her face. "Actually, it is my full-time profession," she corrected him as softly as she could. "I have worked in the conservation of artistic heritage for over a decade." Charles offered a polite nod, but his attention was already wandering back to Victoria, who had immediately launched into a loud anecdote about her latest lucrative advertising campaign. The orchestra began to play a soft, sweeping waltz, when Madeline finally decided she needed to escape to the hotel balcony to find some fresh air and quiet. The overwhelming noise of the ballroom's conversations and artificial laughter mixed with the distant hum of the city traffic below, creating a profoundly melancholic soundtrack for her racing thoughts. Escaping the party, I see. A deep, warm voice caused her to turn around in surprise. A tall man with distinguished gray hair and a remarkably gentle gaze approached her slowly, carrying 2 crystal flutes of chilled champagne. Please forgive the intrusion, but you looked like you desperately needed one of these. Madeline is an extremely talented art conservator, Edward said, bringing her back into the vibrant conversation with Donna Catherine and several other wealthy patrons. She was just telling me all about her intricate work with delicate paintings from the colonial period, and it is truly fascinating. Donna Catherine turned to Madeline with an expression of genuine, unfeigned interest, completely ignoring the other socialites in the room. You must be familiar with the Miller family collection. Then they possess some magnificent 17th century pieces that desperately require specialized, expert care. On the other side of the grand ballroom, Richard watched the unfolding scene with a rapidly growing sense of profound irritation. Victoria was pulling sharply on his arm, desperately trying to direct him toward a prominent group of fashion photographers, but his eyes remained rigidly fixated on the unbelievable sight of Madeline conversing animatedly with Edward Crawford and several other highly influential figures. "Darling, come over here. I really need to take some flawless photos for my feed," Victoria insisted loudly, but Richard barely registered her demanding voice. How on earth was Madeline, who had always been so incredibly timid and withdrawn at these lavish social events, suddenly becoming the absolute center of attention? "Richard," the urgent, panicked voice of Charles Miller abruptly cut through his racing, confused thoughts. "I need to speak with you immediately. It is an absolute emergency." The wealthy developer looked visibly agitated, his wide eyes darting nervously back and forth between Richard and the rapidly expanding group forming around Madeline and her mysterious new companion. "Do you have any earthly idea who that older man talking to your ex-wife is?" Charles whispered frantically. "Just some bored, wealthy old man, I imagine," Richard replied with a scoff of pure disdain. "Why? Does he have some interesting real estate project in mind? My God, you really do not know, do you?" Charles wiped a bead of nervous sweat from his forehead, glancing around to ensure no one else was eavesdropping on their disastrous conversation. "That man is Edward Crawford. He owns the Crawford Group, which controls luxury hotels, massive shopping centers, and countless real estate ventures across the entire country. He is unquestionably one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the United States. And by the way he just defended your wife out there on the balcony, I would say you have made a terrifyingly powerful enemy tonight." Meanwhile, across the opulent room, Madeline genuinely felt as though she had slipped into an entirely different reality. A beautiful dream where her voice actually mattered. For the first time in countless years, influential people were actively, enthusiastically listening to what she had to say about her intricate, beloved work. Madeline, Dr. Henry Smith, the legendary director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, said with a warm smile, "I happen to have a 19th century painting that is in dire need of highly specialized care. Would it be at all possible to schedule a professional evaluation with you next week?" "Madeline," Edward approached discreetly a few minutes later, while she was deeply engaged in a conversation with a prominent private collector about the complex techniques required for cleaning ancient, fragile canvases. "May I steal a few brief moments of your precious time?" They stepped away from the bustling crowd into a much quieter, beautifully decorated corner of the grand ballroom. "I want to sincerely apologize for the utterly unacceptable behavior of your husband," he began, his tone serious and respectful. "But more importantly, I would like to extend a formal professional invitation to you." At that exact moment, the sweeping orchestral music came to a sudden halt, and a man in a sharp tuxedo stepped up to the grand stage to deliver a passionate speech about the vital importance of cultural preservation. The president of the foundation beamed with a radiant smile, clearly thrilled with the massive success of the charity evening. "Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure to announce that we have successfully raised a record-breaking sum of $2 million tonight for our ongoing cultural preservation projects." Polite, enthusiastic applause echoed throughout the massive, glittering hall. However, the president continued, his voice trembling slightly with pure excitement. This extraordinary evening holds an even greater, unprecedented surprise for all of us. It is with overwhelming, immeasurable joy that I officially announce a staggering donation of $50 million for the creation of the very first Center of Excellence in artistic conservation and historical research in the country. And our incredibly generous benefactor has already personally selected the exceptionally talented individual who will direct this monumental center. It is my profound honor to present Edward Crawford as our donor, and Madeline as our new, esteemed director. The massive ballroom absolutely exploded into a deafening roar of applause, with guests standing up to honor the unprecedented announcement. Madeline stood completely paralyzed for a long moment, entirely incapable of processing or believing the reality of what was unfolding around her. Edward gently placed a reassuring hand on the small of her back, guiding her steadily toward the brightly lit stage, where the blinding flashes of countless cameras began to fire incessantly. I simply cannot find the words to adequately express my boundless gratitude, Madeline said into the microphone, her voice trembling slightly but carrying a newfound, undeniable strength. I promise to dedicate every single day to preserving and protecting our shared cultural heritage. From the middle of the cheering crowd, Richard watched the entire scene with a rapidly growing expression of pure, unadulterated horror. His wife, the exact same woman he had publicly belittled and called uninteresting just an hour prior, was now being celebrated as the visionary director of a $50 million cultural project. When Madeline and Edward finally stepped down from the grand stage, they were immediately, overwhelmingly surrounded by eager journalists, museum curators, and major personalities from the global art world. Questions flew from every possible direction regarding her ambitious plans for the new center, her extensive past experience, and her groundbreaking vision for the future of conservation. While Madeline was being respectfully photographed and interviewed, Richard found himself trapped in a completely different, horrifying reality. The exact same people who, mere minutes before, had eagerly crowded around him with sycophantic, flattering smiles, were now actively and discreetly avoiding him, as if his very presence were suddenly a contagious disease. "I need to speak with you," Victoria said sharply, aggressively pulling Richard by the arm into an even more secluded, dimly lit corner of the room. "You have publicly humiliated me tonight, Richard. I will inevitably be associated with this disastrous public humiliation, and it is going to severely damage my carefully curated brand." "What humiliation? I did absolutely nothing wrong," Richard protested defensively, though his voice lacked its usual arrogant conviction. "You spent the entire evening blatantly disrespecting a woman who just became one of the most important, powerful people in the cultural sphere." Victoria responded with absolute, icy detachment. "Someone recorded you calling her broken and useless on the balcony, and those videos are already going viral across every social media platform. My legal team will contact yours tomorrow morning regarding our immediate separation. I did not build my lucrative career to throw it all away because of a foolish man who cannot recognize the true value of the people standing right beside him." Madeline woke up the next morning in her modest, quiet apartment in Brooklyn with the lingering, surreal feeling of having lived a wonderful, impossible dream. She picked up her phone, and any lingering doubts she had instantly dissipated into thin air. There were hundreds of unread messages, endless social media notifications, and countless urgent emails from major journalists. The striking photograph of her and Edward standing together on the illuminated stage was already gracing the front page of 3 different major newspapers. The telephone suddenly rang loudly, breaking the morning silence. It was her sister Lauren, calling all the way from Boston, in an absolute frenzy of excitement. "My goodness, you are absolutely everywhere in the news this morning!" Lauren practically screamed through the receiver. "Mom nearly fainted when she saw your beautiful face on the morning television broadcast." After hanging up the phone, Madeline carefully prepared to go out, having scheduled a crucial breakfast meeting with Edward to discuss the intricate details of the new center. The breakfast took place on the breathtaking, sunlit terrace of a luxury hotel, offering a sweeping, magnificent view of Central Park. Edward was already seated at a table when she arrived, calmly reading the morning paper and sipping a cup of dark, rich coffee. While Madeline and Edward enthusiastically planned the bright future of the conservation center, Richard faced the crushing, immediate consequences of the previous night from his lonely executive office. Charles had arrived exceptionally early, carrying a long, disastrous list of severe problems that seemed to grow exponentially with every passing hour. The firm is being completely removed from the massive commercial complex project downtown, Charles announced grimly, reading a fresh email from his phone. The principal investor is a very close business partner of Edward Crawford in 3 different major ventures, and they refuse to work with you now. On that exact same day, Madeline enthusiastically visited the prime location where the Center of Excellence was scheduled to be constructed. It was a massive, incredibly valuable piece of real estate right in the heart of Manhattan. The project includes cutting-edge laboratories, a specialized historical library, a large auditorium, and a beautiful area for temporary exhibitions, the lead architect explained with visible pride. However, I have one additional surprise for you, Edward said softly, when they were finally alone. He handed her a heavy legal folder containing the property deeds to a stunning historic townhouse located in Brooklyn Heights, which included an enormous, perfectly lit art studio on the top floor. The beautiful townhouse in Brooklyn Heights was vastly more magnificent than Madeline could have ever possibly imagined in her wildest dreams. Built in the early 1920s, the elegant property completely retained its original architectural charm, featuring massive, gorgeous windows that allowed brilliant natural light to flood every single spacious room. What exactly happened to the former owner of this incredible place? She asked quietly, carefully observing several empty antique frames resting against the walls. Albert Miller was a deeply passionate art collector, Edward explained, guiding her toward a large room in the back that had been transformed into a meticulous, overflowing study. He left incredibly specific, rigorous instructions regarding his vast personal collection. Edward continued with a gentle, encouraging smile. He desperately wanted it to be donated to a serious, respected institution, but only if there was a genuinely qualified expert willing to finish the exhaustive work of proper cataloging. Madeline immediately approached the massive wooden desk and began to carefully examine the meticulous, detailed documents scattered across the surface. There were 237 magnificent works of art waiting to be properly documented and preserved. I would be absolutely honored to take on this incredible project, she said without a single moment of hesitation. 3 weeks after the dramatic charity gala, Madeline's daily life had completely, irreversibly transformed for the better. She woke up every single morning in her beautiful historic home, drank her coffee on the balcony observing the waking city, and then headed off to crucial meetings about the conservation center, or worked diligently on cataloging Albert's extensive collection. Edward appeared quite frequently, always using the polite excuse of needing to discuss various aspects of the ambitious project. But Madeline had happily begun to realize that his delightful visits extended far beyond what was strictly necessary for business. They discussed art, European history, world travel, and literature for hours on end. Richard was grimly observing the heavy traffic of the avenue from his silent, empty office window, feeling the crushing weight of his failures. In just 3 short weeks, his once thriving company had lost 4 massive contracts. 2 key partners had hastily withdrawn from the firm, and the primary bank was aggressively pushing to immediately renegotiate the terms of his massive outstanding loans. The incredibly lucrative empire that had taken him over 20 long years of ruthless dedication to build was now rapidly, uncontrollably crumbling into absolute dust. The heavy oak door abruptly opened without anyone bothering to knock, and Victoria confidently marched in, flanked by her severe-looking lawyer. "I have come to collect the absolute last of my personal belongings," Victoria stated coldly, without offering any form of polite preamble. She marched straight to the private executive closet, efficiently packing away the expensive designer clothes she kept there, moving as if she were desperately trying to scrub any trace of her existence from his ruined life. You had an absolutely exceptional, brilliant woman by your side for 15 years, and you foolishly threw it all away, Victoria said, pausing dramatically at the door. Now you are losing absolutely everything because you simply never knew how to recognize the true worth of the people around you. Meanwhile, back in Brooklyn Heights, Madeline was just finishing cataloging another breathtaking piece from the collection when her intercom unexpectedly rang. It was the building's doorman, informing her in a cautious tone that Richard was standing outside, aggressively demanding to speak with her. Madeline took a deep, steadying breath, steeling her nerves, and finally made the difficult decision to let him come up. A few minutes later, Richard knocked on the heavy wooden door, and when Madeline opened it, she was genuinely shocked by his ragged appearance. The meticulously groomed man looked as though he had aged 10 agonizing years in mere weeks. "I came here to sincerely apologize for absolutely everything," Richard pleaded, his voice carrying a desperate vulnerability she had never, ever heard before. "For all those terrible years in which I completely failed to recognize your immense value, for brutally diminishing you in public, for being an absolute fool." Madeline crossed her arms tightly, her expression remaining perfectly calm but undeniably cold. "You did not just lose a vast amount of money when you lost me, Richard," she stated firmly, devoid of any anger. "You lost 15 years with a woman who loved you unconditionally, and you lost your own integrity. I cannot help you, and I want you to leave my home immediately." 2 hours after Richard's pathetic, desperate visit, Edward arrived exactly on time to pick her up for a quiet dinner they had previously scheduled. The charming, intimate restaurant Edward had chosen was small, incredibly discreet, and completely devoid of the usual high society crowd that Madeline had grown to profoundly despise. As they enjoyed their exquisite meal, Edward finally opened up about his own painful past, sharing the story of a difficult marriage that had taught him to be extremely cautious with his heart. "But you are entirely different," he said softly, reaching across the table to gently take her hand. "My feelings for you go far beyond professional admiration, and I promise we will go exactly at your pace." 2 months had peacefully passed since that incredibly significant dinner, and the profound connection between Madeline and Edward had blossomed beautifully. They began to meet regularly, always in a highly discreet and deeply respectful manner, enjoying wonderful evenings at classical concerts, vibrant art exhibitions, and long, quiet walks through the winding, leafy paths of Central Park. There was absolutely no rush and no heavy pressure. It was simply two mature individuals getting to truly know one another and falling deeply, irrevocably in love. Edward consulted her on absolutely everything, demonstrating a genuine, unwavering interest in her brilliant opinions, never once making her feel inferior or small. The state-of-the-art conservation center was taking shape rapidly, transforming into a massive, architectural marvel right in the bustling heart of the city. The foundation had been expertly laid, the walls were rising steadily, and Madeline had already successfully hired exactly half of the highly specialized, talented team that would soon work alongside her. "The first major exhibition at the new gallery space is almost completely ready," Madeline announced happily during a lovely, relaxed lunch in Manhattan. "I have successfully managed to gather an absolutely incredible collection of brilliant contemporary artists, and I genuinely cannot wait for you to see it. Before we celebrate the gallery, I actually have a small suggestion," Edward said, pulling a delicate velvet box from his tailored jacket pocket. Inside rested a breathtaking, custom-made white gold necklace, featuring a delicate pendant shaped exactly like an artist's brush, meticulously encrusted with tiny, flawless diamonds. "Can I put it on you?" Edward asked softly. Madeline nodded enthusiastically, turning around gracefully so he could carefully clasp the exquisite jewelry around her neck. When she turned back to face him, they were close enough to feel each other's warm breath, and they finally shared a tender, profoundly respectful, and deeply passionate first kiss. The beautiful, candid photographs of Madeline and Edward walking hand in hand through Central Park quickly covered the glossy social pages of all the major newspapers the following morning. Richard stared blankly at the vibrant images on his cracked phone screen while drinking cheap coffee in a tiny, depressing rented apartment. He had been forced to aggressively sell his luxurious penthouse the previous month just to temporarily delay the inevitable bankruptcy of what little remained of his once proud company. The painful, undeniable reality was staring him right in the face. Madeline was radiantly happy, deeply loved, and wildly successful, while he had absolutely nothing left. "I desperately need to try to talk to her one last time," Richard muttered to himself, suddenly getting up from the small, wobbly table in his tiny kitchen. He drove all the way to her beautiful historic townhouse, but the strict security guards absolutely refused to let him pass the front gate under any circumstances. Defeated, he sat in his car and wrote a long, tear-stained letter, pouring out his genuine remorse, admitting that he had been a blind, cruel fool who had squandered the absolute best thing that had ever happened to him. He left the sealed envelope with the cautious guards and drove away into the bleak city traffic. Madeline found the heavy envelope when she arrived home in the late afternoon, recognizing Richard's frantic handwriting immediately. She read the desperate words once, feeling a strange sense of absolute closure, and then carefully folded the paper and tucked it away into a deep desk drawer without writing a single word in reply. Edward arrived shortly after, carrying a massive bouquet of vibrant flowers and a chilled bottle of expensive champagne to celebrate her latest triumph. The upcoming issue of the magazine features a massive, incredible spread highlighting your brilliant career, he announced proudly, pulling her into a warm, deeply comforting embrace. The highly anticipated week of the grand inauguration finally arrived, like a wonderful, chaotic whirlwind of intense activity and soaring emotions. The massive center was entirely ready, boasting 4 pristine floors of cutting-edge laboratories, an immense comprehensive library, and a stunning, expansive exhibition area. The crisp morning of the monumental event, Lauren called again, her voice thick with tears of sheer, overwhelming pride, explaining how their elderly parents were proudly showing the magazine article to every single person in their quiet neighborhood. Madeline hung up the phone, feeling an immense, powerful wave of deep gratitude wash over her entire soul. That evening, when Madeline gracefully stepped out of the luxury vehicle at the grand venue, the blinding flashes of countless cameras illuminated the cool night air. She walked with absolute, undeniable elegance, wearing a breathtaking emerald green dress that perfectly matched the brilliant sparkle of her beautiful eyes, her hand held firmly and proudly by Edward. Inside the spectacular, bustling center, the absolute elite of the global art world, including prominent experts from prestigious international institutions, eagerly awaited her grand arrival. She was no longer a hidden, unappreciated shadow. She was a brilliant, shining beacon of immense talent and incredible resilience. At exactly 9 o'clock at night, the massive crowd of distinguished guests happily migrated to the adjacent art gallery for the second major inauguration of the evening. Madeline delivered a breathtaking, deeply moving presentation regarding the selected artists and the profound, transformative curatorial concept behind the vibrant exhibition. Her elegant, powerful words were met with thunderous, sustained applause, and multiple valuable artworks were officially sold to wealthy collectors before her brilliant speech had even concluded. "This is truly a historic, unforgettable evening," a highly influential art critic proclaimed loudly to anyone who would listen. During a rare, quiet moment amidst the joyous chaos, Edward gently guided Madeline onto the secluded, peaceful balcony of the gallery, completely away from the loud, adoring crowds. "How are you feeling about all of this?" he asked softly, wrapping his warm arms securely around her waist as they gazed out over the sparkling, endless city skyline. "Like I am living a remarkably beautiful life," she admitted, with a soft, radiant smile. "And I absolutely could never have achieved this spectacular dream without your unwavering belief in me." They stood together in comfortable, perfect silence, and for the very first time, she looked deep into his eyes and whispered, "I love you." From the dark, lonely shadows directly across the busy street, Richard stood perfectly still, watching the joyous movement at the brilliantly lit gallery. Through the massive, transparent glass windows, he could easily see Madeline laughing brightly, completely surrounded by admirers, looking vastly more beautiful and alive than she ever had during their long, miserable marriage. He observed the undeniable, profound tenderness radiating between her and Edward, a stark, painful contrast to the cold arrogance he had always forced upon her. He was watching a beautiful, vibrant life that could have been his, if only he had not been such a blind, arrogant fool. A well-dressed couple walked briskly out of the gallery, conversing animatedly as they waited for their luxury car to arrive at the curb. "She is truly an incredibly impressive, brilliant woman," the elegant woman remarked with clear admiration. "And to think her foolish ex-husband used to actively diminish her in public. What kind of absolute idiot throws away a woman like that?" The harsh, undeniable truth of the stranger's passing words echoed violently inside Richard's mind, sealing his profound sense of ultimate defeat. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Charles, informing him that the bank had finally foreclosed on his remaining commercial properties. "I understand," Richard replied with a strange, hollow calmness that completely surprised him, finally accepting the brutal, inescapable consequences of his terrible actions. He slowly disconnected the final call and took one last, agonizing look at the brightly illuminated balcony, where Madeline and Edward were sharing a tender, loving embrace. There was absolutely no place for him in this beautiful, successful world that she had so rightfully conquered through her immense talent and grace. He turned up the collar of his worn coat against the chilling wind and began the long, quiet walk back into the dark, unforgiving night, genuinely wishing her all the happiness in the world. Exactly 1 year had peacefully passed since the magnificent, unforgettable inauguration of the center and the stunning adjacent art gallery. Madeline sat comfortably in her beautiful, sunlit office on the very top floor, carefully reviewing the overwhelmingly positive annual reports that detailed their massive, unprecedented global success. Her dedicated secretary knocked softly and entered with a wide smile, carrying a highly official, embossed letter from the prestigious university overseas, formally inviting Madeline to serve as an esteemed visiting professor for an entire academic semester. She smiled warmly, realizing her brilliant career had finally reached the absolute pinnacle of international respect and deep admiration. The telephone on her heavy mahogany desk rang cheerfully. It was Lauren calling, with absolutely wonderful, thrilling news about her brilliant young son, Paul. He had just been formally accepted into the highly competitive, newly established scholarship program at Madeline's prestigious conservation center. The profound joy of being able to directly help her own beloved family, to actively foster the bright future of young, passionate artists, filled her heart with an indescribable, radiant warmth. The center was now entirely financially self-sustaining, a powerful, undeniable testament to her incredible leadership and her fierce, unwavering dedication to her beloved craft. At exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Edward arrived at the bustling center to pick her up for a highly anticipated, incredibly special dinner to celebrate their wonderful 1-year anniversary. As she sat beside Edward, watching the city lights blur past the window, Madeline realized that life had a profound way of revealing the true worth of everything around us. For a long time, she had allowed someone else's blindness to dictate her own value, treating her deep well of knowledge and passion as if it were a trivial flaw. But true value, much like a masterpiece obscured by layers of grime, never actually fades. It simply waits for the right light and the right eyes to appreciate it. The journey had taught her that love should never feel like a constant audition, nor should it require shrinking oneself to fit into the narrow margins of another person's fragile ego. Genuine affection elevates, respects, and protects. It recognizes that shared wisdom and mutual dignity are the cornerstones of a lasting bond. Those who treat human connections like disposable commodities, discarding loyalty for superficial shine, eventually find themselves standing in the cold, surrounded by the empty echoes of their own choices. Ultimately, The most beautiful restoration one can ever undertake is not of a damaged canvas, but of one's own shattered self-esteem, carefully putting the pieces back together to create a life of purpose, surrounded by those who cherish the art of simply being real.